Hello, hello. Welcome to the final episode of 2024. My name is Rachel. I can be found pretty much everywhere as Wool and Spinning. And I'm coming to you from just outside of Vancouver, British Columbia here in Canada. I hope that this finds everybody very well. If you celebrate the holiday season, I hope that you have plans and are going to be surrounded by friends and family. And if you don't, celebrate, then I hope you are getting a much needed rest and a much needed break. I know a couple of the families that my kids go to school with don't have any affiliation with anything and don't celebrate anything, and they are all really looking forward to having a quiet couple of weeks and just hunkering down. And there is a part of me that's a little bit jealous. It's like, that is exactly what we need. Welcome everybody. We have a full show today. It is busy over here, and I hope you guys enjoy it. We gather here to talk mostly about making fabric with our hand spun yarns, whether that's knitting or weaving. And this past week, I actually took 5 minutes. It took 5 minutes. I had it worked up in my mind that it would take way longer, but it only took 5 minutes. I cleared off one of my looms. It had just started to kind of amass a whole bunch of piles of stuff that just needed to be put away, that I kept thinking, oh, I'll do it later, I'll organize it later, I'll, get to it later, and I never did. And so I spent 5 minutes and I got it completely cleared off, and I've actually been able to weave 2 tea towels off of a warp that was on there from this time last year. So I probably have another 2 or 3 towels to go before that warp will be done. It was a summer and winter warp that I was playing around with last winter, and I'm excited to get them done. So hopefully next show I'll have something to show off the loom, woven for the first time in a very long time. The last time I cut something off the loom was back in January of this year. That was a scarf for my sister-in-law for her 40th birthday, and I haven't woven anything since, other than samples for Weft magazine. I did weave samples over the summer for that, but nothing like for myself. Nothing that I like was a project that I planned or that I was working through. And now I have 2 projects that I'm really excited about. So I need to get the looms free, and I need to get this stuff woven off so that I can work on stuff. So welcome to everybody who's in chat today. Of course, part of the Patreon campaign is to be able to attend the show live, and it's so good to have you guys here. Hello and happy holidays to Mary and Marilyn, Dion, Christine, Glenda, Amanda, Paulina, Nicole, Christine, oh my gosh, there's so many people, Mariah, Sam. I know there's more of you that are watching, but welcome. So I'm sure I'm forgetting a whole bunch of people, so I'm sorry. But it's so good to have you guys here. We have a very full show, and I think what I will start off with is just giving you a quick and dirty about the sweater that I'm wearing. This is my Jingle by Isabel Kramer, and this is the yoke. It's obviously meant to be baubles, and this is my hand spun. It was Kinfolk Yarn and Fiber. What did Kylan go by? Kinfolk Yarn and Fiber. She's not dying anymore, but it was Kinfolk. It was a braid that I spun, and it was a 3-ply. It just came out beautifully. It wasn't meant to be Christmas colors or anything like that. It just kind of worked up that way, that it worked in this yoke with this particular pattern. And the white, the natural undyed yarn is actually Katrina's. It's her Tough and Tender. What does she call it? It's her 4-ply superwash targi. That she does, that's in her web shop, craftyjacks.ca. That is this yarn. And actually, I do need to do some mending on it. Diane, bless her heart, she asked me this morning if I had fixed it, and I have a cuff issue on just on this one sleeve, but I wanted to get this washed, and I wanted to wear it today, and I did a ton of mending this past week. I sat and I did it. This month has been all about getting things done and just kind of tying up the bow on things that have been hanging over me for a while, and starting with a fresh slate in January. And I just need to fix that little bit. So I washed it, and I laid it out to dry. I was so glad that I took the time to wash it, because it looks nice and fresh now. It's got this it's fresh white. It just looks good. So it was overdue for a quick wash. Yeah, Sam says, I love when you wear that jumper. That was my first hand spun jumper and I love wearing it. I love this sweater. And it's funny because now I made it in 2020, I think. Yeah, I knit it in 2020. And it's funny because now I would actually go up a size just so I had a little bit more positive ease in it. But when I first finished it, I wore it and wore it and wore it that Christmas. I think I wore it like through that December almost every single day. And every year I pull it out and every year I really enjoy it. But I am tempted to knit another one. I still have this yarn. I've actually thought about using the charted pattern and see if I could put it into a toque, because I would definitely wear that a lot. And I've got tons of this yarn left over. So kind of playing around with some stuff. Anyhow, that is what I'm wearing. My Ravelry projects page has more about it. And if I can find it really quickly here, I will show you. I will put the link in the live chat. And then you guys can have a look if you're wondering about this sweater and wanting to know a little bit more. It is all there. And don't ever hesitate to get in touch with me. Send me a message, send me a note, send me a DM, whatever works for you to get in touch. If you have questions about anything, or leave a comment on the Patreon post associated with this, the link is in the down bar underneath. I try to get back to everybody in a relatively timely manner. And if you ever have any questions about anything that we talk about here or anything that we cover, please don't ever hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to have a chat. Yeah, it's so true. Paulina says getting mending done is rewarding. I was surprised it was very rewarding. I was like, ooh, this feels really good. All right, so let's get into the show. I've got a couple of things I just need to cover. We are going to keep it very quick today because this is going to end up being a very long show if I don't. So if there are any questions about anything that I chat about, please get in touch with me. You can also get in touch with Rebecca if you are more comfortable chatting with her, but we're both very approachable, and please don't ever hesitate to ask either of us anything that we talk about here on the show. So come January, we are going to be continuing on with our 2-year book study. I can't believe we're going into year 2, you guys. Like, how is that even a thing? Of the Spinner's Book of Yarn Designs. I have chosen our book that we are going to do after this one. I'm not going to tell you what it is just yet, but I've already chosen it. Rebecca doesn't even know. Rebecca's going to be like, what? So I've already chosen the book that we're going to do next, but we're going to finish out 2025 finishing off our book study of this book. I'm hoping that this book also finishes us off in 2025 ready for more and ready to sort of delve into some of the things in here and go a little bit deeper. And so in January, we're going to be looking at crepe yarn, and we're going to be looking at yarn structure. We're going to continue our yarn structure discussion that we've been looking at, both in spinning pearls, which is part of what you receive every month. They show up in your inbox. They're on the feed post in Patreon when you sign up and when you join our community. And then also the Wool Circle, which is another tier on Patreon that you can join that's with Rebecca. And she streams the opposite weeks to the live stream. And then we've got Spinning Staples group, which is the book study group that sits and you guys go deep about the book together. And then Queries and Explorations is a separate group. We started meeting almost 6 years ago. I think it's like 5.5 years ago now. And we are currently looking at drum carding. We did a whole bunch of drum carding on Saturday, talked about adding in Angora and adding in cotton, and we're having a nuanced discussion about stuff. And we're going to continue on with our drum carding discussions because we haven't even gotten into electric drum carding yet. So we are meeting for the final time this year on December 28th, and Staplers is meeting for the final time this year on the 27th. And then in January, we will continue on with where we're at. So like I said, this is going to be quick. All of our community groups that meet throughout the week, you guys can see all of the dates here. We do have a maker morning tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Pacific rather than 6:30. My kids their last day of school is today, and they are so exhausted. I was telling Spin Group this morning that just before I exited out to do this with you guys, I was telling them how tired the kids are because they've got the most awesome teachers this year. I just think they're both phenomenal teachers, and both kids really like them. One of them is a friend of mine, which is just a happy coincidence. And the kids are having a wonderful year, but because their teachers are on it, they have a huge amount of work. So the kids are so exhausted. So I told them they could sleep in tomorrow morning and just have a really chill morning tomorrow morning, and we'll have Maker Morning a little bit later. So watch for the link coming out later today. And everybody who's a member of the Patreon community is welcome to join the Maker Mornings. The spin groups and the fiber prep and weaving groups, those links come up in the Slack channel. So if you're part of the spinning circle on Patreon, you will see those links. Please just click on them and click through. People are so welcoming. You will feel like you have always been a part of our community when you join into those groups. Don't feel intimidated. If you want to stay quiet and you just stay on mute, that's totally fine as you get to know who people are. But you will be welcomed with open arms. It's already been published, but at the beginning of this year, I did a year-end vlog for sort of reflecting back on the year on all of the things that we've done. There's information in there about what's coming up with our breed blends and color study that Megan of Bramble Ridge is doing for us. Those links are available now, and I will pop that in the link to watch the year-end vlog. The link is in the chat, and it's also available down below. And I go through some of my own reflections about the year. This year ended up being, I'm just going to call it a spade a spade. It ended up being a very, very, very challenging year for my family, and there was a lot going on behind the scenes and behind the podcast and in the background. And I think probably some of the shows, for those who know me really super well and have been around for a really super long time, I think you guys probably saw that a little bit, that maybe there was the odd show where I just seemed a bit off, or I was a little bit withdrawn, a little bit quieter than I normally am. And I'm not a super, super gregarious, outgoing person. I'm actually quite quiet in real life. And when I'm with somebody who I'm really close with, I tend to be quite chatty. But overall, I tend to be a bit quieter. And I'm not a really big personality. And I think there was a couple of shows where that side of me, that quieter, more withdrawn side, probably came through. And for those who sort of knew a little bit about what was going on, I think you probably saw that. So I did do some reflections in this year-end vlog about sort of some of my making and some of the things. And one of the big things that really came out this year, because I spent a lot of time journaling and I spent a lot of time writing and thinking about what I want to do with my making and what I want to do with my creative life, and bringing it more to the forefront, and sort of recognizing that our creative outlets and our creative living, for lack of a better term, is like the most important thing, but also kind of not really important at all, and sort of rectifying those two things and figuring out how I was going to go forward. So thank you for watching, and thank you for all the support this year, because it's meant a lot. And I think some of you don't even realize how truly supportive you were without even meaning to be. So thank you. The last two more things that I wanted to mention: breed blends and color study. On January 1st, please watch your email, because all of the links will be posted for ordering, and all of the spoilers for what Megan has created for us will all be released. All will be revealed, and there will be the post there for you. So watch your email and watch Patreon, and I will be posting in the Slack channel, and I'll be talking about it on the first episode in the new year, and you guys won't miss anything. But I just wanted to mention that will be coming January 1st. So watch for that. I think that's it for now. I have another thing that we're going to talk about in a little bit. We'll talk about it in a little while. Are we going to talk about? Yes, we're going to talk about it in a little while. Are we? Maybe we aren't. Maybe we should talk about it now. The long wool revolution. So for those who are Patreon members, this has already been released as well, and it was a helpful tutorial type video to help you guys with the long wools. You are going to need this when we do our breed blends and color studies. So bookmark this, earmark it, download it, save it, do whatever you want to do with it. But keep this video close by, because you are going to need it in the new year for breed blends and color study. Okay, so I'm just putting a pin in that for now, and hopefully you guys will enjoy watching it. I've had some really positive feedback, so thank you so much. And hopefully this will get you started with your long wools and give you a little bit more confidence with spinning them. And that is available now on Patreon. I think that's it. So let's get into the show. All right, sorry for the like very operatic music. It was very over the top, but I can only play it once a year and I love that song. It's by Scott Buckley and he does such a beautiful job. Yeah, Marilyn says, love this music. I know it's very like over the top and it's not light and fun like we normally have, but I just, oh, this time of year, I just love, I grew up, my mom came from a very musical family, and my mom, she actually plays piano really beautifully. She doesn't play anymore, but she actually, when she comes over here and plays around with our piano, she's still got it. And it's funny because I grew up with, my mom always played records growing up. So even though people were transitioning to CDs and stuff, my mom took a long time to kind of get on board, if you will. And she never really got into cassette tapes. She kind of went from records to CDs. And we grew up listening to like the like opera. And we listened to a lot of like the Christmas carols done in like the traditional classical way with opera. So growing, I have these very fond memories of listening to sort of very like a real eclectic, different tastes of music. My mom would play anything from like Broadway show tunes to like opera to like Santana to like modern alternative rock music. Like my mom has very eclectic musical tastes, and yeah, at this time of year, I tend to default back to those like traditional Christmas carols. I just love them. So yeah, a little behind the scenes. I'm also a big fan of opera and all of that stuff. And I think it's because I grew up on it. You just get used to it. I absolutely love Andrea Bocelli, and there's a few other, Mark I can never say his last name, Maserati. I'm not even going to try. There's a whole bunch of them. I just love them. Josh Groban. And I listen to them all the time. And then the kids are like, Mom, do we have to listen to this? I'm like, oh, but it's so beautiful. Anyhow. Oh, it was all, I can never say, is it Manaheim? Steamroller in Our House, Baby. That's awesome. My mom would play Cats, the Broadway musical Cats, because she loved Memory, that song Memory, da 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 da, yeah. And recently it's been the soundtrack of Wicked, of course, because, you know, the kids think that they're Ariana Grande. So that's been hilarious. Okay, let's talk about, I've just got a really, really quick thing to share with you for spindling, actually. I started a new spindling project for 2025. I try to have a spindling project going in the background every year. And this one is going to be on my support spindles. And let's chat about that quickly first. It's funny actually, Mary, because she said we listen to a lot of classical music. Hubby is a musician and an arranger. So Diana Twist, her husband, is a musician, and they are always listening to lots of different stuff. And I think it helps to give you a real appreciation for lots of different types of music, that it's not just top 40 or it's not just folk or, you know, whatever it is that you kind of lean toward. I think that's why I enjoy such a variety. All right. So I pulled out of my stash from this was stash that I bought back in 2020 when Rebecca was here, actually, in March of 2020, when everything was shutting down and we were all kind of having to meet before everything sort of ended up really going to pot. This is from Katrina, Crafty Jack's Boutique. She had made a whole bunch of these roll legs off of the drum carder, and I had two sets of them. I have this gray blue set that's organic Polworth, Sari silk, and mulberry silk. But then I also had a set that was like pinks, so the dark bluey purple here was a dark reddy pink. And then the light was light pink. And so I had that set, and I did those a couple of years ago. I think I did that in 2023, if my memory serves. And then I had these ones still to do. So I pulled them out on Friday to sort of start looking at them and getting them organized. I think there was 10 in each set, or 12. There's 12. I'm just gonna try to keep the crinkling to a minimum. And I pulled them out on Friday, and I learned a lot from prepping these the first time round when I spun these the first time round. So what I did when I first started spinning these was I tried to sort of just draft out the beginning and then just spin them on the support spindle that way. but these are very dense, and there's a lot of fiber in them. And what would inevitably end up happening is as the fiber is coming off of the roll leg in the spiral that it comes off, it ultimately would sort of end up not a tangled mess in my hand, but it would just end up kind of a bit of a fuzzy felted mess in my hand. And not felted in the sense of like completely felted wool, but it just kind of ended up really kind of destroying the prep by holding on to the entire roll leg. And they're heavy, and I mean heavy, it's all relative. But they're long and they're big, and it's a lot of fiber to hold on to. And I didn't want to pre-draft the entire thing and try to put it onto a distaff and hold on to the distaff. It just felt like a lot of fussiness for not a lot of payoff. So what I kind of learned by the end of that project, by the time I'd spun through the 12 roll legs, was to actually just take off a couple of inches. So just sort of take a little bit and pull it off, and then draft it through, so that I ended up with this, rather than trying to deal with the entire roll leg at once. And this could be loaded onto a finger distaff, just a little one, and held onto and spun off of that. And it just worked so much better. Not as much fiber. You pre-draft through all of that sari silk, because when you look at this, there's just, Katrina's done a great job of blending it all through and having all of this fiber in here, but it's a lot of sari silk. I don't know what the percentages are. I'm not actually sure she wrote that on here. Oh, she did, because she's so good. 22% sari silk, 16% mulberry, and 62% organic pullwork. That's a lot of sari silk, and I love it because it gives texture and it's fun and it's got these great colors. But as you're drafting through this and sort of pulling it, you can see that there's sort of these chunks that come through. That's just pure sari silk, like it's a lot, and they kind of, it's sort of in there as clumps a little bit, and so drafting it through, it just sort of alleviates the, just makes the spinning experience so much nicer, right? And so giving it that really pre-drafting it to within an inch of its life, I mean, it just makes such a light, airy prep. And then what I did, because this year has been really crazy, and this fall in particular has been really crazy, I bought this from Helen of Maudsley Fiber Arts, based in Manitoba, at Knit City, Calgary in August, and I had yet to actually sit and play with it. So I had sat and spun it, but I hadn't actually sat and put any fiber on it. And I was feeling a little bit guilty because I just think it's absolutely beautiful. And this is she calls these her hollow whirl spindles. And you can have a look at them on her Instagram, and they're on her website, and they're just beautiful. And they're perfectly balanced, and it just spins like a dream. For my hand and for my personal preference, I would prefer that the shaft at the top was a little bit finer, was a little bit thinner. So I'm going to send her a message over the holiday and ask her if we can connect in the new year, and if I should just maybe sand it down just a little bit, because I find I just can't get my fingers around it. And it's just because my hands aren't actually very big and my fingers aren't particularly long. They're a little bit stubby. And I find that if the shaft is too is a little bit too thick, I can't get a good flick. I literally can't get traction on the shaft itself. So I'm gonna ask her about that, because I know that it's not difficult to modify it slightly, and it would be so easy. So I've just been playing with this and spinning through it. One of the things that I learned from already doing these roll legs is all of this texture in here. That's what's going to make the yarn. That's what's going to really create a really beautiful finished yarn. So I learned with the other roll legs not to play around with that, and not to try to draft it out or try to tinker with it or try to make it smooth, or the whole point of this is texture. And so just allowing myself to leave that and just keep on going. So this little bit spun up, the first roll leg spun up really, really quickly. I was visiting with friends on Friday night, and I couldn't believe how quickly the first roll leg spun up. I almost was I just double checked my bag 3 times to make sure that I had actually spun the entire first roll leg before going on to the second one, which is this. because I couldn't believe that it was done already. So really fun. I actually might chunk this like what Rebecca was talking about on the Wool Circle a couple of weeks ago. She's been chunking her makes and sort of setting a certain goal for herself every day of how much she wants to finish, and so that she sort of knows approximately when the project is going to be finished. And I really like that idea without putting a ton of pressure on myself. And I think I'm gonna do that. Yeah, that's a great idea, Dion. Actually, yeah, it would be nice if she's sold both thick and then thick and thin spindle shafts. I'm going to ask her about that because I want it to be just a little bit finer. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. My fingers get tired with the bigger shaft. Rebecca agrees. My fingers just get fatigued. Like I find, and I think part of it is I haven't been doing any support spindling this fall at all. The last time I did anything with my support spindles was back in the summer. And I'm just finding that my fingers are fatiguing, and it's partially, it's a stamina thing. I'm out of practice. So I just have to like get going with it again. I know, Christine, that's what got me with this hollow whirl spindle, was I haven't got that shape and style yet. Yes, the struggle is real. Yeah. Canada Post is supposed to be back to work today, so hopefully people who are waiting for stuff or hoping to order stuff will be able to get stuff. Probably not before Christmas, but at least if you're thinking about ordering some things or thinking about some of this stuff, you'll be able to get it. Oh, Sam, that's a long time to wait. She ordered a spindle back in October and is still waiting for it. Yeah. So that's my spindling. Very simple. I wanted to keep it quite simple for today. I just got started with it. We'll have more to talk about in the new year. Yeah, just not pre-drafting too much when I'm actually spinning, just allowing the yarn to happen. And I know what that's going to create in the finished yarn. Actually, if I had thought about it ahead of time, I would have included a photo for you guys to see what the other yarn looked like, especially for those who are newer to the community and are new to the show. But I'll try to remember that for January, because I maybe will have a little bit more spun, and then I can show you where I've gotten to, and show you the yarn that I made that was in the pinks and the reds. I don't know if I'll do anything with them together necessarily, but I am looking forward to having the two next to each other and seeing the differences in color, because the Sari Silk and the Mulberry Silk are the same colors. It was the organic Polworth that was different colors and dyed differently. So it'll be interesting to see how they compare. All right, I have a really quick share with you that's knitting related, because I don't actually have anything on the needles right now. Everything is done, which has left me feeling very much at wit's end, or sort of a little bit idle. But I do have a little something to show you with knitting. So let's do that next. So if we go to this screen here, where did it go? There it is. I've got all of these. So this is all of the mending that I did this past week. So I wanted to share with you this. So hang on. When I finished this sweater, this is Junction by Andrea Mowry. And when I finished this sweater, my first problem with it, and I would have, if I had known, I actually would have ripped back and redid it. So if I had gotten through some of the brioche and realized that it wasn't going to work, I would have ripped back and actually started over. It would have been worth it. So just bear with me for a minute, because that might seem like a lot of work, but honest to goodness, it would have been worth it. So what happened was the neck, the number of stitches to cast on for the neck, even in the smaller needles for me, ended up being, it just really ended up being more of a boat neck. It ended up being a much bigger neck. And for this sweater, for this fit, it just doesn't work because there's nothing that I can wear underneath. Like even my bra straps show because it's just a little bit too wide. And it's quite a warm sweater because the entire thing has color work through the entire body of the sweater. So there's the yoke design of the brioche, but then from here down is all like little flecks of color. And if you guys want to see the actual sweater itself, I probably should have included it. So that was probably not the best the best planning, but that's okay. You guys understand. You're so good. This is my Ravelry projects page for this sweater. So the other problem with it was so the neckline was really bagged out and didn't sort of cinch in like it was supposed to when you fold the neckline over and pick up and knit the stitches together. So that was the first problem. And then the second problem was that there aren't any short rows at the back neck to lift the back neck up. And a sweater like this, it would have improved the fit significantly if there had been short rows before you start the brioche. And it doesn't bother me that at the back you end up with sort of an inch or two or an inch and a half of black before the yoke starts. It's at the back neck, your hair covers it, a collar of a shirt, a shawl, your jacket. If anybody's looking at the back of your neck that closely, there's probably other problems. So in the end, I was disappointed with a couple of design decisions that I had made as I was knitting this, and I should have trusted my gut. I should have ripped back. The black yarn is Biches and Bouches. Is it Biches and Bouches? It was quite expensive. Like it's like $17 or $18 Canadian a skein. So for like 5 skeins, it adds up. It was $100 or something like that, or just shy. Anyways, needless to say, what I ended up doing was I took black yarn that was a yarn that was in my stash that I'd had in my stash for a while, and I actually threaded it into the folded over neckline, and I tightened it up enough that I can still get the sweater over my head comfortably with no problems, but it tightened up the neckline, and you can see what a big difference this is, like compared to here. So there's a white t-shirt underneath on my dress form that I keep on there permanently that I don't wear anymore because it's all stained, but it covers my dress form and gives me kind of the idea of what a t-shirt underneath would look like. And then cinching up that neck slightly, it's a little bit, it just fits a bit better. It still goes over my head, no problem, because now I've lost the elasticity of being able to pull a sweater over my head. But it just cinched up a little bit and worked really, really, really well. So I fixed that, and yeah, Christine says it's much better. And then the other sweater that I fixed, remember when, I think it was last show or the show before, I was wearing my pink velvet, also by Andrew Mowry. I knitted out at Jamieson's and Smith, their 2-ply Spindrift, and right at the front, right here, was a hole that I didn't realize had developed. And I've already fixed this sweater a ton. And anyways, I went on the hunt for some mending videos because it's visible, like it's right there. You can't really stick a crocheted flower there. You can't really stick a big patch there. It's like right there. So I found this tutorial on Instagram, and I'll throw it in the Slack channel later. And to get into the nuances of how she actually does her mending, you need to join her. I think it's Patreon as well. But I followed, it was enough of a tutorial on Instagram that I could kind of figure it out because I understand how knit stitches work and how knit fabric works. But I threaded in the 2/8 cotton, and then you graft over top of it, and then you're able to cut the 2/8 cotton away. And that's what it ended up looking like. It's okay. You can see, like if you're up really close, you would be able to see that it is in fact mended. But then I did duplicate stitch over top to fix the diamond, the half diamond of the blue. And that actually covers it even more because now your eye just skims over it. So when I showed Mike, I was like, can you see where I've mended the sweater? And I stood like a couple of meters away from him, and he was like, and granted Mike's eyes are not the best, but he was like squinting at it going, no, I can't see anything. So I did get that fixed, and that's what it looked like in the end. So we can see, because it's a close-up photo of that little patch, but honestly, in real life up close, once this is rewashed and everything and it all kind of just works itself out, I think it'll be totally fine. One of my sweaters that's in this pile is the gray one right here, right below Nora's purple tank top that I knit her a couple summers ago. That one was the singles yarn that I have some of it here. I can never remember what this stuff is called, but it's that like unspun, the Canadian unspun wool. Fixing that, and it was ribbing at the bottom. I put it on a few weeks ago and again realized that some of the ribbing had disintegrated a little bit. Again, very difficult to fix. This yarn is very, very difficult to use a needle and thread and pull it through, because as soon as you put a bit of tension on it to pull it through with the needle and thread, does not like you. And then on the very bottom there is my Gentle Morning, also by Andrew Mowry. And that yarn had been sitting for a number of years. Like I want to say like 10 years. And it had thin spots in it. And I caught as many of them as I could while I was knitting. But there were a couple as I was finishing up the knitting that had broken. And I hadn't caught them in the knitting. So I fixed those. And then the last one on the bottom there is my Albini. There was on the cast off edge on the button band, it needed to be fixed. And then the two that were Nora's, the toque over there that's with the sequins, and then this one here that's the tank top. For the cast off for the tank top, it wasn't stretchy enough, so she couldn't get it over her head. It fits fine. It's just that as she's grown, it doesn't fit over her head. So I ripped out the cast off, and I actually did a tubular bind off, and so basically a sewn bind off, and it fixed it like right away. So now she can get it on and off. It's comfortable. She really likes this tank top because it's a it's black light activated, so it's super fun in the fall. And then her toque had a big hole in it that I think probably was a catch from something, like it maybe caught on something when she was wearing it, like on her jacket or like something, and it just pulled the yarn isn't particularly good quality, and then it had pulled the sequin, the acrylic nylon-y kind of yarn. So I did the same thing that I did on my pink velvet, and I did the duplicate stitch, and I stitched over and fixed it. And you can tell that it's fixed, but it's not visible enough to the untrained eye. So lots and lots of mending, lots of stuff to fix this time around, this fall. And I'm really glad that I spent the time to fix this stuff, because I haven't been fixing stuff and I've kind of just been leaving it, and it sort of ended up piling up. So I'm gonna try to stay on top of it a bit. Yeah, thank you, Dana. She says that my mending on the pink velvet looks really good, and she said she needs to do the same on a couple of sweaters. This one I think I'm actually going to rip down and re-knit, because it's right at the cast-off edge of the cuff. You can't see it because it's basically white on white, but I think if I was actually thinking maybe a crocheting around, but I can see where it's like continuing to come apart, so I think just ripping out the cast-off and redoing it would be better. Yeah. So that is it for that. All right. We have a really, really great question that came in from Dion that I wanted to address because it's something that we talk about quite often. And I think there's, on my part, I think sometimes I assume knowledge for people, and I'm like, oh yeah, they know what I'm talking about. And I think sometimes it's good to slow down, take a minute, and clarify. So let's do that next, because it also ties into something that I was working on over the weekend that ended up being really fun. I thought I had completely messed it up, but time is a wonderful thing, and it ended up being something like I've actually really come around. So let's do an Ask Anything next, and we'll talk through the project at the same time. It's funny, actually, Rebecca says my sock mending pile is truly out of control. Mine got completely out of control when those moths attacked the socks, and there were so many that like I couldn't fix them. And I had to let a whole bunch of them go, which was so too bad. But I can really see, especially with socks, how important it is to keep on top of them and to fix them. Yeah. You know what, Rebecca, that is such a great way of seeing it. She said if somebody is nerdy enough to spot it, they're nerdy enough that you can point out how clever your fix was. I love that. And Sam says if they're close enough that you can boop them on the nose, they're too close. I love it. Yes, I agree, 100%. All right, this was a really thoughtful, great question from Dion, and I hope that it sparks some conversation in the chat, because I will... I'll try to keep up with what you guys are saying, because I know everybody has lots and lots of ideas about this particular question, and I'm always really curious to hear what people say. So this is the question from Dion. One of the things you've mentioned several times, by you, she means me, several times in the density of your knitted swatch, and how you have a different outlook since becoming a weaver. After making 2 swatches for a sweater, it made me think about you. Thank you, Dion. I've heard that you don't want to be able to stick a finger through it, but I've noticed that when I go down in a needle size to get that type of swatch, it seems too dense and has no drape. So what do you look for when swatching for a sweater? I love this question so much. I think it is such a great question, and it's something that we probably don't talk about enough. So, oh, I'm so sorry about that. That was not meant to happen. So I have a few things to say about that question, because I think we could fall down a whole rabbit hole and we could be here until next Tuesday. But there are a few things that I want to say at the outset, and then we'll kind of delve into them in a little bit more detail after I sort of give you the quick and dirty. So the quick and dirty is, I really started to change how I approached my swatching and what I was looking for in fabric after I was while I was working through and after I finished my Unit 1 for my Master Weaver course for the Ontario Hand Weavers and Spinners Guild. And the reason for that is because the focus of the Unit 1, you do something like 30 something swatches for that unit. By the time you're done and by the time you put your binder together, there's like 30 something swatches of fabric, and they're all different plain weaves, twills, stuff that you come up with on your own, all that kind of stuff. And the focus is on creating the right fabric for the right application. So how are you going to, like, what yarn are you going to choose, and how are you going to set that yarn on the loom to get the fabric that is the most appropriate for the application that you have. So the focus is sort of more on creating the right fabric for what you want to use it for, rather than let's create a fabric and find a use for it later. And I think partially what that taught me was that there are intentional choices that we make when we're knitting and weaving, and when we're figuring out our gauge, and when we're figuring out our set on the loom or on our needles, that really affects that finished fabric. And it can be the difference of 0.25 millimeters in your knitting needles that is the difference between a sweater for myself that's going to wear really super well versus a sweater that's not. And so that's the first thing. And we'll come back to that in a minute. And the second thing is that I stopped really thinking about drape. I stopped kind of thinking about drape and looking for drape, because sweaters for me, I don't really need drape, and I don't look for drape. And I know that maybe sounds a bit funny, because with weaving, that's a really important piece of creating woven fabric is, does it drape? Does it move? Does it do what you want it to do? And sometimes you want drape and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you want more drape and sometimes you want less drape. Sometimes you want a moderate amount of drape. But for knitting patterns and for knitted fabric, drape is not really the thing that comes to the forefront when I start thinking about sweaters. And part of that is because one of the things that's most important to me is it elastic? Does it have memory? Does it sit on you where you want it to sit, and does it stay put? Or are you spending the whole time pulling at it and trying to get it to go back to where it is supposed to go? Because some of the sweaters that I've knit in the past that have a lot of drape, they end up kind of just hanging there, and they can sometimes be heavy depending on the materials in them. And for me, I want my sweaters to move with me, and I want them to be able to go back into place, and I want them to sit where they are supposed to sit on my body, rather than worrying about a sleeve being really drapey and really flowy, and now it's getting in everything and it's in my way, and when I push it up it doesn't stay there, or when the ribbing is stretched it doesn't go back, that kind of stuff. So drape isn't really a thing that I think about particularly. So I do tend to default to a denser swatch, like Dion was mentioning in the question. She was like, like when I go down in needle size it gets denser, and the answer is it does, yes, absolutely. And Dion and I chatted about this in person yesterday. But for me, I don't mind that density, and we'll talk about that in just a sec. The other thing that she mentioned was putting the thumb through the fabric. So this is something that I used to do all the time, and I used to sort of think, well, I can't stick my thumb through it, so therefore it must be fine. And I've really kind of gotten away from that test, if you will, and this is why. I don't know if you guys remember, sort of in the early 2000s, sort of like 2000 and, sorry, not the early 2000s, like around 2010, so like, you know, 10, 15 years ago. The big thing was knitting really open fabric with big needles so that you could buy more expensive yarn and it would go further. And that was right at the time when some of these yarns were coming onto the market that were more, and you know, 5 skeins would put you at like $200. And that's still the case now. Like there's still very expensive yarn on the market, and we know that. But I think one of the things that I started to find with those sweaters was, first of all, when you're knitting on with a really open gauge with thin yarn and big needles, for me, it's really hard for me to keep my knitting gauge really even and really nice. And then the other piece of that was after it's washed and finished and blocked and everything, it's really easy for those stitches to get caught on stuff, and it's also really easy for the fabric to become deformed. And so almost like, I think within a few years, I started to sort of ease away from that, but I didn't go to a denser fabric. I just started to knit a slightly more closed fabric. So not as open where you can stick your finger through, but not as dense as what I knit now. And I used to see some of my friends, and they would have their knitted swatches at like knit night and stuff, and I would see it and I would feel it and I'd be like, holy smokes, that's dense. Like, wow, you're using like really small needles for that yarn. And I would think like, that's like, wow, that is dense. Now I'm like, oh no, that's the right gauge. Like, I've totally come around. So from going from that really super open gauge to starting to tighten up a little bit, I went to this type of fabric, and I'll try to show this as close to the camera as I possibly can. But this is knit on the bottom. I just have to look at it so I know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. So the bottom part of the swatch, this part here, down here, this is knit on 4.5 millimeter needles, or US size. What's a 4.5? It's a US size 6, I think. And then the top part is knit on US size 7s, I think, and that's a 5 millimeter needle. I do everything with knitting needles in metric, and I'm getting better about swapping back and forth. I'm starting to remember, but I still find it, I have to think about it. So this is a very, very typical fabric of what I used to go for. So probably from the time that I started the podcast to a few years ago, this is what I was knitting most of the time. And that's why I had to fix all of my sweaters recently. So, and you can see, like, I can't stick my finger through it, but it's still pretty loose. It's still pretty, and it's got lots of drape and it's got lots of movement. But it's very open, and you can almost kind of see through it. I can see through it, even if you can't see through it on the thing. This is Bowmont alpaca held with Surrey merino silk. Surrey alpaca merino silk. So held double. That's why it's got the halo and a little bit of a fuzz. And so this was the type of fabric that I was going for like most of sort of the 20 teens. And the reason why I liked this was you didn't need as much yarn, so I could stretch the yarn. It gave me that openness to the knit fabric that I really like, and I like that lightness and the airiness of it. The problem is it doesn't wear well. So as soon as this is washed and blocked, it opens up, it blooms. That airiness that is in our hand spun, that as you spin for longer and as you continue on your hand spinning journey, you tend to put more and more air into your yarns, and they become just naturally a bit lighter. And most of us like worsted and semi-worsted yarns in our community. That seems to be kind of what most people are spinning. But they do get lighter. You know, those initial yarns that you spin when you're first learning, they tend to be a bit denser, a little bit heavier, but trust me, your yarns do lighten up. And so knitting at this open gauge, it allows the yarn to bloom, and it allows it to take up that space, and it's really, really, really light, but it abrades, and it tends to, if there are any weak spots in the yarn, what I've noticed over time is they will break. And there's nothing to sort of protect those singles, whether it's a 2-ply or a 3-ply, it doesn't matter. There's nothing to protect the surface of the yarn because they're not nestled in with each other and really nestled in together. And so a swatch like this a few years ago, which I knit this a couple of years ago, I would have been like off to the races knitting a sweater with it. But now I sort of look at it and go, wow, that's really pretty. It would be great for a shawl. be perfect for a cowl, something low wearing that doesn't need to be really super tightly, densely knit. But for a sweater, I want something a little bit denser. So from there, that same yarn, I went down to a 3.5 millimeter or US size 4. So this is much different. We've lost the drape and we've got a thicker, denser swatch, and it has, and unlike this has a 3-dimensional quality to it. So that's where the weaving course really informed me. So one of the things that you notice with weaving is when you weave a plain weave, woven fabric has a 3-dimensional quality to it because of all the interlacement, and you're weaving over under. And when you do plain weave, you've got one interlacement, so it's going over under once. But with twill, you're going over 2 or more threads. So with twill, you're going over 2, under 2, over 2, or with a 3x3 twill, you might be going over 1, under 3, over 1, under 3, etc. So you've got all these different types of interlacements happening, and because of those interlacements, the fabric changes in different ways in the finishing process. And with twill, if for anybody in our community that's ever woven with 8/2 cotton and done a 2/2 twill, and then woven with 8/2 cotton and left it as a 1x1 plain weave, not 1x1, I was thinking of rib, has left it as a plain weave, you know that those two fabrics feel really different, and that twill has like a 3-dimensional quality to it and a sort of a certain density to it. Still light, soft, super absorbent, etc., etc., but it has a certain it shrinks more. It has a certain 3-dimensional quality to it, and it wears really super well, and it looks really nice, and it has a really nice finger feel when you touch it, a really nice hand to the fabric. That's what I look for. I look for that slightly 3-dimensional, slightly denser hand feel to my knit swatches. Now, I took this swatching one step further, so that's why I wanted to use this question to kind of springboard into something else. I took this swatching slightly further because then I was sort of thinking about this Bowmont alpaca. It was 50/50 Bowmont alpaca that I spun quite a few years ago. I had sort of thought that maybe I would leave it as just a single strand and not hold it with anything else. And then I also thought, well, maybe I'll just hold it double with itself because I have about 1,200 yards of the finished yarn. And I sort of thought, well, maybe I could hold it with itself, but I didn't love either of these swatches. The yarn isn't super consistent. The prep, there were some shorter bits. There were some areas where it wasn't super well blended. I spun it long draw. It was very fine. I 2-plied it. And so when I did this swatch, I did talk about this on the podcast a while ago. I wasn't super happy with it. And even though I sized down to 3.5 millimeter needles for this held single, and it was a US size 4, and it was, it's way too open. I would have had to go down probably to a 2.75 or a 2.5 millimeter. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not knitting an entire thing on that type of needle when it's not socks. So I put this aside and kind of put it away for a while. And then last week, I all of a sudden just felt really inspired. And I was like, I'm pulling out that yarn. I'm going to do something with it. So I had been able to get at our local yarn shop because I didn't have enough of the Surrey alpaca merino silk DK to do an entire sweater. I only have about 600 yards of it. So at our local yarn shop, I found this alpaca haze, it's called. It's by Rowan. And it's 58% alpaca, 22% wool, 20% nylon, which wasn't my first choice. I wanted a mohair. I wanted a mohair silk, but they didn't have any in the natural undyed. It was all colored, and this was the only choice. So I swatched again. So this is same 3.5 millimeters or US size 4s as this swatch. That was the perfect swatch. This one is the same, but the Rowan Haze is, I need to take a drink of water. But the Rowan Haze is a lace weight, and the Surrey Alpaca Silk was DK. So different swatches. And as you can see, we're back to that slightly more open fabric, not as dense. We're back to having some drape. It's a little bit lighter, a little bit looser. This is going to hang really beautifully, but it's still going to have memory. And I'm willing to tolerate that because I don't want to go down to smaller needles. So this is where it becomes a creative choice of like, do you want the denser fabric? And I could knit this on 3mm needles, or am I willing to compromise between the drapiness of the original fabric, the density of the best fabric, and sort of find a happy medium? And that's what's ended up happening with this. And so I was so inspired over the weekend by this project and wanting to make something with this yarn. I don't want to knit with white yarn, and I don't want to dye a sweater. Then I got out my dye pots. So I got out my dye pots and I did 3 color experiments. So this was the first one, this was the second one, and this was the third one. So these first 2 were actually dyed with the same base. They were both dyed, let me get my notes out because I will forget and I will mess it up, and then I'll have to redo telling you guys all about it. So these first 2 were dyed with 20% turquoise, 40% fuchsia, and it's actually magenta, 40% magenta, and 30% yellow, and 20% black. Yes, 20% black, 20% turquoise, 40% magenta, 30% yellow. So it was a triad. And the black sort of adds to the blue, so it ends up coming up very blue. So this one was left. I didn't do anything more with it. You can see that some of that, I did the Rowan haze, the alpaca haze, and the Bowmont. I did 10 yards of each. So you can see both in there. You can see how they changed the colors were more blue in the haze. It came up more brilliant. And then the Bowmont's a little bit more muted, a little bit browner. It's almost like a gray, purpley brown. And that was the original one. And then the second one was also dyed the same way, but then I did a brown wash on it with it was with brown, but the depth of shade would have been 0.5%. Love this so much. So those were the first 2, and I really liked both, but I was sort of like, I really wanted something a little bit more grello. And so this was 80-20 turquoise yellow base. Oh, and I have photos for you. Let's do photos. That's way better when I can explain things with photos. Okay, so this was the Rowan haze. I had to take it from the balls and wind it into a skein. And then this was the 80-20. So this was the 80-20 on the Bowmont. This was the initial layer of dye. And I did it at 0.5% depth of shade. So I didn't I didn't want like a really brilliant, really dark finished product. And this was the Bowmont before dyeing. So it's kind of a creamy ivory white, very similar to my sweater. And so I dyed it first, and that was this. And then I skeined up the Rowan haze, and chat's going crazy, but I'll have a look in just a minute. And then what I did with the Bowmont was, after I had dyed the first layer, the second layer is 0.25%, nope, 0.5% brown. So it's depth of shade at 0.5%. And this was the Rowan haze with the green. You can see how much more brilliant it is compared to the Bowmont alpaca blend. It's just that merino in there, and that Surrey alpaca just took the color. It was brighter right away. And this yarn, actually, it's not my favorite. It felt a bit vert green and a bit primary, but I knew what I was going for in the end. But I really liked, like, just it was just beautiful in the dye pots, you know. And then with the brown over top, this is what came out. So the wash on the brown for the Rowan haze just came out absolutely beautiful. But the brown, the strike of the brown was inconsistent. And I know what I did wrong. I put the citric acid in at the wrong time. And I should have let it just sit for 24 hours in the brown before adding the citric acid. Me and Dion had a whole discussion about it. But the yarn itself is beautiful. And then this is how the Bowmont came out. And the blue broke in the dye pot. So unfortunately the blue and the yarn itself isn't as even as I was hoping for. I kind of, you know, I had and there was enough water, so on and so forth, but the blue didn't adhere really super evenly. There's so much for me to learn, you guys, so much. I'm just loving this so much. And so this is how it all kind of came out in the end. So I felt so inspired, and I talked to Dion about it, and I figured out some of the mistakes that I had made, and it was really, really helpful. I pulled out my 3.5 millimeter needles with the US size 4, and I did a little swatch, and this actually isn't true to color. It's showing up with you guys it's coming up a little bit too brown, or sorry, a little bit too green. It's more brown in real life. It's more of a copper. It's really, really pretty. I really, really like it. I don't know if I pull away, yeah, the camera just doesn't like it. So now I'm looking at patterns, because the original pattern that I had thought of that I really wanted to dye and knit, I need a solid yarn because it would take away from all the lace in the yoke to have a slightly variegated yarn, but this came out so pretty. And the yarn really is behaving well in the swatch. It's really, really nice. It's got a nice feel to it. Even the kids were like, oh, I really like that. So now I'm going to pick a pattern. I might actually just knit another field day. Seriously, like I love that sweater so much, and I wear it all the time, and I keep coming back to it again and again and again. I might just knit a field day. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So let me go back to the chat, because I've missed out on so much, and you guys are so great. Oh, that's hilarious, Christine. Those sweaters knit on big needles make me think of string vests. You know, it's funny. I look at some of my stuff that's older that I knit that was on really open gauges, and I can see the appeal. They knit up really, really fast, and I learned a lot, but it's not what I'm looking for now. And I like that we can look back and learn from what we've done. Lisa says the copper is so pretty. I love it. And actually, I was worried. This is going to sound really vain. I was worried it was a bit too close to my hair color, because my hair color has changed a little bit over the last 5 years. It's not as bright as it was. My hair's not as vibrant as it was. It's definitely faded a bit. And I was worried that it was too close to my hair color. So if I bring my hair forward. But I was actually talking to Mike, and I was showing Mike, and he really liked that there's sort of the blue in there and the little bit of green. And then when you hold this is darker, because when the brown struck on the yarn, it was quite dark because it was concentrated. And then you've still got that little bit of green in there, and I've been wearing so much green this fall. Mike was like, actually, I think it works really well. It was so kind of him. So it kind of got me over my fear of like, oh, is this gonna work? Because the other thing that Dion and I were thinking about was, and this is gonna just send you all down a whole rabbit hole, I could use the Bowmont alpaca as warp, and I could weave a big piece of fabric with the Rowan Haze as the weft, and I could weave a piece of fabric, and I have enough yardage that I could weave enough fabric to sew a sweatshirt. Right? And Vivian of What Viv Knits, is it What Viv Knits? What Viv Does? She's so inspiring. I think she's wonderful. Oh, I don't know if I can find it, you guys, this quickly. Can I find it? She did a knitted sweater, a woven sweater, What Viv Does. If you guys don't follow her, she's in Nova Scotia. She is so unbelievably inspiring, you guys. Her knitting is beautiful. Her weaving is beautiful. She's always got these wonderful projects going. Right now, she's been working a lot with flax. And yeah, I would highly recommend giving her a follow. And she did this woven sweatshirt a while ago. I'm not going to be able to find it. It was so... Oh, here it is. Oh, I found it. It was meant to be. I know you guys hate it when I show you stuff on my phone, but too bad. Look at that. That is woven and sewn. Right? Right? So inspiring. And it was hand spun. Hand spun, hand woven, sewn. So torn. I know, Lisa, I need to trim my bangs. I know. I know. All right. Finished objects. Let's talk about finished objects. All right. I have quite a few things to share with you. Back in earlier this year, dear Dion sent me some Corriedale to play with that she had been playing with. It was just this beautiful fleece, and she had carded it up for a little bit of it for me, and she sent it along, and it's just the most beautiful yarn. I just love this yarn. And I just spun it as a 2-ply, and I just, you know, sort of spun it up. Didn't really think about anything because I just enjoyed working with the fiber so much. And because I've been swatching with this Surrey alpaca merino silk, and it's sitting on my desk, and I don't have very much of it, I don't have enough to like do a lot with it, I decided to find my Corriedale and I put them together. And this is actually for my sister-in-law who doesn't watch the show, so it's perfect that I can show you before it gets gifted. I knit a Salut Cherie by Sari Nordland, and Katie has a lot of hair. She has just an unbelievable amount of hair, and so and she looks really good in these beret style toques. And this is actually a little bit too big for me, but I think that it'll fit Katie. And I knit this on Friday night when I was spindling and spinning and hanging out with a couple of friends. And I put the stem on because I had to have the stem. And actually I got Nora to model it for me because and James was not letting her have her photo taken, but it looked really cute on her. And this was spinning the Corriedale. This was doing it, and I'm just really happy with how it turned out. And I'm excited to give it to Katie for Christmas. I hope that she'll wear it, and I hope that she'll enjoy it. I've already washed and blocked it. I blocked it on a 9-inch dinner plate, and the decreases are just so lovely. You can see here the decreases just come up really, really beautifully in the tam or the beret. And it's got the little stem at the top, and you just pull the yarn through. You don't try to cast it off or anything like that. And you start off with a rolled hem on smaller needles. It's just lovely. It was such a fast project. I finished this within about 3 or 4 hours. It was just so fast and really enjoyable. So I hope that Katie likes it, and I hope that she'll get some wear out of it. I know she asked me for it last year, like last winter, and I just didn't get anything done. So I'm glad to have been able to do that for her for Christmas. My Diana is chock full of finished projects. So one of the questions that I got this past week was about tubular bind-offs. And we had this whole conversation in one of our spin groups about tubular bind-offs. And I prepared for you, and now I can't find it, you guys. Where is it? I had prepared for you guys a video. Oh, here it is. Why is it there and not where I want it? Hang on, let me just make sure that I'm clicking on the right thing. Anyways, Dion had asked me if I could please show, here it is. Dion had asked me if I could please show how I do the tubular bind off and what I do to get my tubular bind offs really even and to have them work the way that they do. So I redid the tubular bind off on my Takha cardigan, which is back here. It's by Sari Nordland. We'll talk about it after the video. But what I ended up doing was I added quite a few inches of knitting. I ended up adding more than I thought that I would initially when I was chatting on the last show. I added about 3-4 inches of knitting, and then I did the cuffs, and it fits way better now. It's just way more comfortable. I'm not going to be constantly pulling at the sleeves because it's meant to be an oversized comfy cardigan. I don't want short sleeves. And so when I redid one of the sleeves, I filmed it for you guys. So enjoy this. I hope that it's helpful. And I hope that you guys, that it helps for those of you who are still learning some of these bind off techniques and some of these cast offs and cast ons. So I'll see you on the other side. So I was asked in Spin Group whether or not we could talk about the tubular bind off. It's been something that has come up again and again and again in our community because it seems to be one of the many cast offs that are used in a lot of knitting patterns right now. It is very popular. So I hope that this little tutorial of how I do the tubular bind off is helpful. This was from a discussion that came up in Spinners Group a couple of weeks ago, and I just happen to be working with very bulky yarn at this time on a very bulky sweater that is really easy to see what's going on camera. So I hope you guys find this helpful, and I will see you on the other side. So I have my two sleeves here ready to go. One of them, I have not moved the stitches yet, and the other one I have moved the stitches. So I'll show you how I move the stitches back and forth, and then we'll flip to this one and I'll actually show you how I do the tubular bind off. So normally what a pattern tells you to do is to work 2 rows, one where you're slipping your, where you knit your knits and slip your purls, and then the second row you slip your knits and purl your purls. And so you end up with these 2 rows at the top of your knitting before you graft the stitches together that have slipped stitches. I skipped that step. So that's why in Spin Group I had been asked to show you guys how I do this. It's because I skip those stitches. So, or those rows, I'm sorry. So when I skip those rows, what I have found is that it gives me a stretchier bind off when I'm finished, and it still gives me the look that we're looking for with the tubular bind off. And the tubular bind off is kind of neat because it looks like a rolled edge. It looks like the knit stitches continue going over the end, and you can really see it in this fabric because it's chunky wool. This is bulky wool, and I'm knitting on 6.5mm needles, which is a US size 10.5. So, you know, big needles, big yarn, so you can really see the beautiful edge that you get there as it rolls off. And this is the bottom edge of the cardigan. I did not do any of the rows that encourage you to do slip stitches. I skipped that completely. So, and this is why it was a big discussion in Spin Group. So what I do, as you can see, for sleeves, I generally use the magic loop method, and this is where you divide your stitches in half and you are knitting literally across the stitches here, and then you push your needle back in and pull it out to do the other half of the stitches. I have found, this is how I do socks as well. I do magic loop. For me personally, doing this for years and years, it works really well for me. It's quite fast. I like having the cable out the back. It doesn't bother me. I know some people find it gets annoying. It's good for me. So what we do to set up for the tubular cast off, I'm skipping those 2 rows of slipping stitches, and now I need to move my stitches back onto 2 different needles so that it looks like this. Okay, I've got two different sets of needles in here. What you're basically doing is you're taking your knit stitches. This is a knit stitch right here. You're taking your knit stitch and you're allowing it to move in front of your purl stitch, which is then going to sit to the back of the work. This is how I visualize it in my head, so I'll try and articulate this as best as I can. But what I sort of see this as being is your knit stitch is sitting at the front of your work and your purl stitch is sitting at the back of your work. So what you see from the front is a purl stitch. But if you flipped your work around, you would see a knit stitch facing you and a purl stitch at the back, right? Because the back of a purl stitch, the front of a purl stitch is a knit stitch. So what you're doing is you're grafting those 2 stitches together and you're creating sort of what I think of as a tunnel. So you're grafting those stitches together. So by taking your knit stitch that's at the front, that's presenting as a knit stitch to you, and putting your purl stitch on the back needle, which I'll show you in just a moment, you're allowing those stitches to kind of shift almost and sit behind one another. So now the purl stitch is sitting behind your knit stitch. And as you graft them together, you're allowing them to come together like a tunnel. That's how I think of it. Honestly, I think of it as a tunnel. And that's what gives you this beautiful rolled edge, because you're grafting those stitches together. So once I started to learn what was actually happening in the knitted fabric, that was when I started to really understand the tubular bind off. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how you move your stitches back and forth. So what I do is I take the back needle that I have as my magic loop, and I'm going to take that first stitch and I'm going to slip it toward me. And then I'm going to take my other needle and I'm going to take that purl stitch and I'm going to slip it away from me. So then the front needle is going to slip that knit stitch toward me. the back needle is going to take the purl stitch. So you see how they start to line up? You see how the knit stitch is now lining up with the purl stitch, and the next knit stitch is lining up with the next purl stitch? Isn't that cool? You see how it creates that tunnel? And then we're going to take the next knit stitch on the front needle and the next knit stitch on the back, or the next purl stitch on the back needle. This yarn splits a little bit when I do this, so I just have to be very, very careful that I don't split the yarn as I'm going. So I just have to be very mindful. Knit stitch to the front needle, purl stitch to the back needle. And honestly, you're just going to go all the way around your piece, however big your hem is, whether it's a cuff of a sweater or the hem of a sweater or the hem of the brim of a toque, if you've done a top-down toque, whatever it is, that's what you're going to do, okay? And you're going to go all the way around to the end of the work, and you're going to have all of your knit stitches in front and presenting to you as purl stitches in the back, okay? So let's move to the one that I've already done, and I will show you how I actually do the grafting. All right, so here I am with my slipped stitches. I've gone all the way around and I have it all ready to go. A lot of the instructions that I have seen for how long to leave your tail for grafting is to leave a length, to measure the length of whatever it is that you're grafting, and then to leave a length 4 times as long. For me personally, I have found that that's a bit too long, and so I tend to leave between 3 and 3.5 times. So what I do with a cuff is I actually wrap the yarn around just very, very loosely. So I will actually take the yarn, I'm a little bit tangled here, just give me a sec. I will actually take the yarn and I will wrap it around 3 times. So let me see if I can show you guys how I do that. I just wrap it around 3 times. I've already got my needle on here, so it's not a super, super accurate way of showing you, but that's actually what I do is I wrap it around 3 times, like I actually wrap it. I'm very, very visual, you guys know that. I think many of us in this space probably are. And then I use a large tapestry needle. Depending on the gauge of the yarn, I will use a finer needle. It really depends on the bulkiness of the yarn, what I'm working with, what I need to be able to see, etc., etc. So to get started, this is where the conversation actually came from in Spinner's group a couple of weeks ago, was how do we get started so that we start off with a really nice edge? And I was trying to explain what I do and how I do it, and then I skip those 2 rows of slipping stitches, and bless her heart, Dion, who's as visual as I am, was like, next time you do this, could you show us? And I said, absolutely, I can totally do that. So, and I love it when people jump on their cameras or jump in and show with pictures, whatever works for you guys. I love it when we're able to help each other like that. So I don't want this to fall off the table, so I'm just going to let that drop, and I'm going to put the yarn back here so that I can move over and you have a really good visual field right here. So what I do, this yarn is coming from the back of the work. So it's coming from the last purl stitch at the end of the ribbing. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, just before I start, there was a fantastic article in Knitty years ago when I was first learning how to do this. And it's all photos. I will see if I can try to find it. I printed it all those years ago. This is from like 2007, 2006 even maybe. And it's one of those articles that just for whatever reason, the photos that they showed, the way that she wrote up the instructions of how to graft and how to do Kitchener stitch, it just clicked in my brain. It just made sense. So I'm going to teach you the way that I learned it through that article. And there's kind of a chant that I do while I'm doing this that I have memorized because I've done it so much over the years. I really encourage you to practice it, you know, and I know it's a pain to undo Kitchener stitch. I know it's a pain to undo when you've done all that grafting, but honestly, you just have to do it over and over and over again, and you will get really, really good at it and remember the steps. So I will talk through it as I go, and you guys, you know, if I can answer any questions, you guys can ask them. So I've got all of my knit stitches here. and I've got all of my purl stitches in behind. So on this back needle here are all of my purl stitches all the way along. And like I said earlier, we're going to graft this knit stitch onto this purl stitch, because on the back, that purl stitch presenting forward is a purl stitch, but presenting backwards, that's a knit stitch. So we are going to create that tunnel, right? We're going to create that grafted tunnel, so that if we were to look through here, if we were to look underneath, we would see this beautiful tree canopy, this beautiful canopy of stitches going across. That's how I visualize it. That's how I think of it. So what I'm going to do on this first one is I am going to put my needle in purlwise. I'm going to purl the knit stitch first. And this is what Dion was asking about, was how do I get this boggy stitch here tight enough that I don't have a boggy sort of setup when I'm done. Okay, I moved my cameras around, and I hope that this will be really, really clear for you guys and you can really, really see. It's hard to see things upside down, so I thought if I move the camera, I know it's right here and it's kind of annoying, but you'll really be able to see what I'm doing. So let me go back. Okay, so I've got my working yarn coming from back here from my last purl stitch when I finished my ribbing. And I've got this sort of long strand here, and I'm going to go into this first knit stitch and I'm going to purl it. Okay, so I'm going to go into the stitch purlwise because I'm just setting things up. I'm not doing anything else, I'm just setting things up. And what I do, and what I was trying to explain to Dion and everybody in Spin Group, was I actually pull it tight and I hold it with my thumb. So you see how I snugged it up a little bit, and it's snug on the cable here, and I just hold it with my thumb, just very gently. I'm not squeezing the bejesus out of it or anything, but I'm just holding it snug there. Now I'm going to go into the back stitch back here, and I'm going to go into that purl stitch that's in the back. You see this purl stitch back here? I'm going to go in there and I'm going to knit it. I'm just setting things up. I'm going to knit that stitch back there. Let me see if I can turn. See how I'm knitting it? I'm going in knitwise. Okay, this is really important. The direction that your needle goes in is really important. And I'm going to let it fold over here. See how it folds over? It's the first part of your knit. It's the first part of your knit, the leg of your knit stitch. I'm going to hold it again a little bit snug back here. And then I'm going to come back to this front stitch and I'm going to knit it off the needle. And again, I'm holding this yarn a little bit. I'm just tensioning it because I'm going to make sure that it's a little bit snug. It's not tight, it's just snug. Envision knitting like it's almost like I'm trying to keep the tension that I had as I knit. I'm trying to keep it the same. So I've knit that stitch off, and I'm going to set up my next stitch. I'm going to set up my purl stitch on the next knit stitch. I'm going to purl, set it up. See how nicely that looks like? It looks like the same gauge as what I was knitting with. What I do with these big cables that are hanging out in the back is I actually usually just stick them into the fabric in the back to hold those needles out of the way. Just kind of gets them out of the way. And again, I'm going to put my thumb there. I'm going to hold on to that yarn, and I'm going to purl into the back stitch to purl it and pop it off the back needle. And I'm going to set up my next purl stitch again. So purl. Setting up that purl stitch means that I'm going to knit into it. When we're setting up, we do the opposite of what we need to do. Again, I'm going to hold that yarn just very gently, and I'm going to knit this front stitch off. And you see how I haven't done very many yet as the stitches that I was knitting down in the ribbing. That's how I get them so consistent. Okay, so I'm going to set up my next knit stitch with a purl. I'm going to go into that yarn purlwise. Again, I'm going to anchor my thumb there. I'm going to go into the back stitch. It's a purl, so I'm going to purl it off the needle. And I'm going to watch how tightly I'm holding that to make sure that that stitch looks the same size as the ones down in my ribbing. And I'm going to knit my next knit my next purl. Hold that yarn back here with my fingers. And I'm going to knit this stitch off of the needle because it's a knit stitch up front. So knit, purl, knit, purl, thumb, purl, knit. See how it just looks like the same gauge. The stitches are all the same size, and it's just giving that initial one that little bit of a tug. And what I do sometimes if I find that it's just not quite tight enough, like let's say this got a bit boggy back here and it got a bit stretched out and it's not quite as tight as I would like it to be, I will go back and I will use my needle to find that stitch and I will tighten it up a little bit. Usually the trick is just finding it. Right in here. Just tighten it up a little bit if you want to. You can tighten it a little bit, pull that through. I don't need to tighten this up, but I just wanted you to see what it looks like to tighten it up. And then you can pull those stitches through. Just tighten it up a little bit if you want to. You don't need to. Just follow where your yarn goes. Just follow it around. One of the things I find really helpful is if you hold on to the top like this and just give it a tug, it pulls everything into alignment where it's supposed to be. So I knit my last purl back here. I can see that that's a knit stitch. So that means that I need to knit a knit. Knit my knit stitch, purl. So the way that it was articulated in the article to me, that from years ago when I learned how to do this, was to chant in your head, knit, purl, purl, knit. Knit, purl, purl, knit. Knit, purl, purl, knit. So I've knit, so now I need to knit again. Knit, purl. Again, I'm just cinching it up a little bit. Purl. Because these yarns, this yarn and these needles are so bulky, it's a little bit finicky to get into the knits, to knit that back purl, but you can do it. And there you go. You see how it's just that perfect rolled edge, just like we want. Sorry, I'm moving up as I'm talking. It's because this is all twisted. Let me untwist it. There we go. All right, so I've purled this back stitch, knit, purl, purl, pop it off, knit. Once you get into a really good rhythm, this goes really quickly. It's actually a lot faster than people think it is. And you get a nice stretchy bind off if you don't do those 2 rows of slipping stitches. Knit, purl, purl, knit. Knit, purl, purl, knit. Knit, purl, purl, Every so often I give it a bit of a stretch, give it a bit of a pull, just making sure that my tension is correct, making sure that everything is falling into where it's supposed to be. It's not going to be perfectly even. A lot of it will block out when you wash your knits. Knit, purl, purl, knit. Give it a little bit of a tug. Okay, now we're at the last 2 stitches. So now we're not going to be needing to set up anymore. So we're going to knit, purl, just like we would. And we're going to purl, knit. But now we don't have another stitch to set up. So when we knit this off the needles, we're going to knit this front stitch off. There's no other stitch to set up. So we're done. So we're going to knit that off the needle, and then we're going to purl this back stitch off the needle. But there's no more setting up. So this is where things can get a bit can get boggy, and you can end up with extra yarn, and it doesn't look as clean as it could be. So after you knit that stitch off, give it a tug, tighten it up, make sure you've got that beautiful knitting tension there. And then I anchor it by holding on to it. I purl that back stitch off. It usually pops off your needle. It's okay. Give it a tug, pull it into place here so you've got that perfect knit stitch that's grafting those two together, and give it a bit of a tug. And you've got that perfect closing. Let me get this out of the way. And you see how just giving that little bit of an extra tug, it just closes everything up beautifully, where the beginning of the round isn't quite as obvious. And what I will often do from there is I will try to find the beginning of the round on this side, and I will just kind of pop in there and bring the yarn through and pull it tight so that it almost looks like the round continued on. There's no, because if anybody's looking at your inside of your cuff, the inside of your wrist that closely, you've got other problems on your hands. So pull that through underneath that first knit stitch just to cinch it up and close it up so that you've got a really nice continuous edge there, and you don't have to worry about where, you know, creating a really nice finish here, and you know, it just finishes off the knit really beautifully. And then what I do is I actually flip the sleeve inside out. I'll give this one more tug because now I'm inside, so I've usually stretched this a little bit. I'm just going to zoom out slightly. So I've got my cuff here. I'm going to tug this a little bit tighter, and I'm just going to gently weave in my ends by going up the inside here. Tuck, and I'm going to go into the next one. Just grafting up the sleeve, up the cuff actually. I'm actually in the ribbing. All the way up. I'm just going to pull that tight. Check and make sure that it looks nice on the right side. And then I actually turn the corner and I go back with my sleeves, only because sleeves tend to get pulled on a lot, and that sort of full 180-degree turn seems to really finish off cuffs, just to hold them a little bit more secure. I haven't found that they unravel or get loose back here where the join is. It's a little bit more secure. Pop that to the right hand side, and there you go. There is your beautiful tubular cast off. And that is how I do it. And over time, and this is stretchier because you don't have those slip stitches. I think some would probably argue that it gets a bit bogged out over time, that it gets stretched over time. I haven't found that to be the case. I'm not super hard on my knits, and but you could pull this even a little bit tighter if you wanted to. Although that puts a little bit of stress and strain on the yarn, but I don't think that it would be a big deal. And that's how I do the tubular cast off on any of these edges, like cuffs, brims, the bottom hem of sweaters. That's how I do it. Thank you for watching, you guys, and watching the tutorial. It gives me a little bit of a break with my voice because I knew today would be a bit of a longer show, and it gives me a chance to rest my voice a little bit so that we can finish off. Finished objects. So the cast off was on this Takha cardigan. So this was by Sari Nordland. It is this bulky knit that she designed a while ago. I didn't know about it, and then in one of her recent YouTube videos, which I don't watch faithfully, I don't have a lot of opportunity to watch them and to sit and I really enjoy watching some of the knitting vlogs. I find them really inspirational. And she was wearing this and she was lamenting that hers was getting really worn and she wanted to make another one and blah, blah, blah. And I realized, like, I've got the perfect yarn in my stash. So this is Disdero Ranch Ro-Ram Bulky, and they're single. It's actually a low twist 2-ply is actually what it is. But it washed up and blocked beautifully. The sweater fits really nicely. And actually, I thought I would show it to you on because it's super easy. It's really, really nice. It's so warm. And like, it's super cute over other sweaters. So I'll just back up. I could have made it a bit longer, but it was starting to feel like it was getting too long because the cropped version actually ends here. Unfortunately, there's a difference between these two skeins of yarn. I'm not sure. I'm surprised at how different they are. So it's created this like line around the entire cardigan all the way to the other front. But my arm is right here. You can't see the back. Like, there's nothing I can do. I guess the two skeins were different enough, but it is so soft. And I love this sleeve detail. So you start at the back neck here and you work your slip stitches down here, but then you keep it going through onto the sleeve. And then you do this really aggressive decreasing to create, like, it's almost like room for the elbow. I really like it. I really like this sweater. No buttons, no buttonholes. It's meant to be slouchy and open. You're supposed to be able to reverse it if you want and wear it upside down, which I never will. But yeah, I really, really like it. And it is so cozy and soft and warm. I love it. So it's more obvious in real life, actually. Rebecca said I didn't see the difference until you pointed it out. My arms are in the way too. It's like right at where your arms are. In real life, it's quite significant, which is kind of too bad. I think this, I didn't say this in my year-end reflections vlog video, but I think this might be my favorite knit of 2024. Now that we're at the other end and I finished all the things that I'm going to finish for this year. This is the Kuutar, K-U-U-T-A-R, K-U-U-T-A-R-T by Sari Nordland as well. I kind of fell down a bit of a Sari Nordland rabbit hole in November. I love her patterns. I always have. There's a whole bunch of them that I really want to make. And this was on my bucket list. And I cast it on a whim one day in November, and I just kind of started it, and I just didn't really look back. I just kept knitting and knitting and knitting and knitting. I was completely monogamous with it until it was done. This is washed and blocked. The lace yoke came out really, really nicely. The yarn is Melly Knits. It's her CVM cotton mulberry silk bat that I bought at Knit City in August, and I had 2 bats, and there's something caught right there, and I spun it into a 3-ply. We talked about it extensively on the podcast when I was working through this yarn. I tried like 4 different patterns with this yarn. Nothing really clicked, nothing really fit. And then on a whim in November, I ripped everything out that I had tried with this yarn and I knit this. And I just kept knitting. So the yoke is really interesting because there's these wrapped close-up photography, and I'll post it on Instagram for you guys to see. But it really showcases the hand spun and the nuance of the mulberry silk in there, the dyed mulberry silk that was carded in. Erin did the carding on this sweater, I think, from something Melissa said. I think it was Erin's combination. And it just really, these wrap stitches, like, they really just showcase the yarn really nicely. And then because of the overall neutral feel of the yarn. It has a slight pink tinge that's not really showing up in the camera. It's a little bit corally. The focus is on the lace yoke and on the stitches in the yoke. I mean, it's just really fun. I didn't have enough yarn to do the full length sleeves. I think the sleeves were something like 3 or 4 inches and then you do the ribbing, and I ran out of yarn. So I only have a very small amount of yarn left, but I did get the 9 inches for the body with the 1.5 inch rib at the bottom here. So at least I can wear high-waisted jeans, a high-waisted skirt with it that would look really nice, because I didn't want it to be too short. I wanted it to at least be something, it's still cropped, but it's not so short that I can't not wear something with it. And then at the back here, I did work the short rows. They're optional. Before you divide for the body and the sleeves, you can work short rows back here to lift up the back neck slightly. And I did do that because it just gives a better fit across the back neck. You need that little bit of extra fabric, whether it's at the top here or at the bottom. If I were to do this again, I would do it myself and I would put them in at the top before I started the lace chart. I really like the short rows at the top back neck rather than at the bottom here, but it worked. And I'm glad that I took the time to add them because it just lifted it up a little bit and it just fits nicely. The other thing is that the yoke is knit on smaller needles than what the gauge of the pattern is. So I think if I were to do this again, I would actually do a small knit swatch of the actual yoke itself to see what this fabric would be like and whether I could open it up slightly, because this was knit on 3mm needles, which is a US 2.5, and this is knit on 3.5mm needles, which is a US size 4. And I think if I were to do it again, I would maybe open this up slightly and do it on a 3.25 or even a US or even the 3.5 and do the whole thing just a little bit more open, because it's lace. Going back to the whole swatching conversation, it's lace. And you want those yarn overs to really open up, but you also need a denser fabric because it's a sweater and you want to be able to, like, you know, I want to be able to wear something underneath just because it is lace and you can see right through it. But you also want something that's going to wear really well. It's a catch-22. I could go either way. But I am really happy with how the fabric of the body came out. Again, slightly denser. It's got that slightly three-dimensional feel to it. I really, really like it. And it's a tiny, tiny bit crunchy because of the cotton in there. So it's not, because it's 20% cotton, it doesn't fully 100% feel like wool. It's like, yeah, there's definitely something in there. And I'm really, really, really happy with how this turned out. So yeah, Christine, I totally agree. She said it would look really nice over a dress. I think so. Like, this is a high-waisted pencil skirt that I keep on Dana because I have nowhere to wear a pencil skirt on a daily basis. So I just keep it on here for, you know, to give her an outfit. But I think anything like this, it would look nice over top of high-waisted pants or jeans, or a little bit fancier, would look really nice. Like, it's definitely one of those knits that's something that I'll pull out when I'm, you know, looking for something a little bit nicer. Yeah, thank you, Dana. She says it's beautiful. There's so many patterns by Sari that I could knit. I have another one that was actually, it was one of her patterns that I wanted to knit out of this yarn, that we talked about earlier in the show, but, it needs to be a solid. It needs to be like this to really show off the yoke. So I've got other yarn in my stash that I think I'll use for it instead. Christine says she'd like one of those in light pink. Yes, I agree. So pretty, says Stephanie. Thank you, you guys. Thank you. Rebecca says she likes the short rows at the top too. They also help me figure out the front and the back. I agree. Like, I'm going to have to put a tag in this to signify what's the back because it is hard to tell. We could totally do a Sari Nordland knit along at some point. And I think too, because some of her patterns, because they are all over lace or they're all over cables, it's nice to have a community to do it with, because there's a lot of knitting in here. Like, every row for the yoke, which goes quite deep, you're really having to pay attention. And I found that as I worked the lace pattern, it became more and more intuitive. One of the things that I've learned with yokes like this is I put stitch markers at certain increments so that I know that if I get to that stitch marker and I'm not at the right point in the patterns, I've done something wrong. And so I tend to put them every 2 or 3 usually every 2 lace repeats. So it's not every repeat, but it's usually every 2 or 3, so that I know, okay, I've done something wrong. I need to tink back just for this section. And then you're not getting multiple rows down and realizing that you've completely screwed up the pattern. Oh, that's a good idea, Mary. She says her husband designed some iron-on tags for her needlework. That's a great idea. I actually have some that you sew in. There's one in this sweater, but I don't think I can show you. And I just have to sew it in. It's really, really super fast. Yeah. Thank you. Dion says, I love that sweater. Suzanne says, lovely sweater. I think they're both like the cardigan is like super cozy, knit in like really, really thick yarn on 6.5 millimeter needles, US size 10s. And then this is like lacy and fine, knit on US size 4. Totally opposite ends of the spectrum. They both were done in November. I really enjoyed knitting both of them. I really enjoyed both projects. They brought a lot of joy. They were fun, and they didn't take too long. The nice thing about this one as well, because you didn't have a bunch of sleeves to do, like there wasn't a ton of sleeve knitting afterwards. I did the sleeves and then I did the body, so I knew that when the body was done, it was done, and I knew that I was sort of finished, which is really nice. And I'm looking forward to doing more of these short sleeve sweaters, because I think they would be really good for, like, we live in a climate that's not, it doesn't get super cold here, it gets damp. But I'm often looking for something that I can layer that's not quite so heavy and not quite so warm. So I might have a long sleeve t-shirt on underneath, but then I don't want a big heavy long sleeve sweater. So it'll be nice to have some variety. Christine says I'm drawn more and more to short sleeved sweaters as layering pieces. And I've been looking more and more at some of the slipovers, some of the knitted vests that, again, same thing. You can just slide them over a long sleeve shirt and they're not quite so warm and quite so much sweater. And you don't need as much yardage. So then you can enjoy the project, have fun with it, and then move on to the next. So definitely leaning more and more towards trying some of those other shapes and some of those other garments in the new year. Okay. The stream was almost 2 hours today. Thank you for sticking with me. I know that tutorial was long, but thank you for sticking with me. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season, no matter how you celebrate. Happiest of New Year's to all of you. I hope that New Year's is a time you can take some time to reflect on the year that we've just had and enjoy, celebrate some of the things that were really great, and then heading into the new year that you've got some stuff to look forward to and some projects that you're excited about and some stuff that that you want to create for the new year and that you're excited to explore. I hope you guys have a wonderful couple of weeks. I love Rebecca finishing off the wool circle with that she wishes you are all warm and well fed. I think that's just wonderful. So I wish you all the same. Happy holidays, everybody. The wool circle is happening on New Year's Eve, so December 31st. So please, please, please tune into that if you are a part of the wool circle. It will be a massive community participation extravaganza. That's why we didn't do that today. And I hope you guys have a really great couple of weeks. I will see you January 7th. And in the meantime, watch for all of the Bree Blends and Color Study ordering links. Patrons of the community, you guys get a discount code. So do not order until you get your discount code. That will come out on January 1st as well. So watch for the discount code for all of the patrons of our wool and spinning community. All right. Until next time, happy spinning, happy knitting. Have a wonderful few weeks. I'll see you guys soon and see you in the new year. Bye, everyone.